Since the topic is prayers, I like to start this kind of learning together with a prayer for studying Torah. It's at the top of the source sheet. Next time I'll put in with actual God's names. It'll just happen this way. I'll start on a tune. It's a tune I learned from when I was up in Berkeley from Rabbi Menachem Creditor. I'll start it on some 999s, and then you can join along when you feel comfortable with the melody. You can join along in the words of the prayer for studying Torah. 99999 9999 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah la'asok b'divrei Torah hafoch ba v'hafoch ba la'asok b'divrei Torah yai nai 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 yai nai 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 yai nai 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 nai. So there's an old joke you may have heard about an atheist who goes to shul every Shabbat and sits next to his friend Ginsburg. One day someone asks the atheist why he keeps coming to services if he doesn't believe in God. He responds, Ginsburg goes to shul to talk to God. I go to shul to talk to Ginsburg. So with that joke in mind, obviously we're all here at shul, and I don't want to make any assumptions as to why anyone comes to shul. We have Ginsburg and we have Ginsburg's friend, so there's a plethora of reasons. That being said, we do spend a lot of time in shul praying, right? So anytime there's an opportunity to sort of try to understand what it is we're doing when we're praying, I like to take that opportunity. And so I will take that opportunity as we are going to turn to some wisdom from our ancestors in the Parsha, Parshat Toldot, that we were just reading, as to how our ancestors in this story, how Yitzchak and Rivka interacted with prayer, and also what it means to get a response from God, what that looks like. So I'm definitely, I'm going to ask for people who feel comfortable reading. I think when we read the verses from the Torah, I would love it if we could do it in Hebrew and English, because I want to unpack some of what's going on in the Hebrew. But then when we look at commentary, we can stick to reading in English. So does anyone feel comfortable? We're going to be focusing on the 3 verses from Bereshit 25, 21 through 23 that you can see on the first page. Does anyone feel comfortable to read those 3 verses in the Hebrew and English for us? Thank you, Rabbi.
Yikes. Okay. Okay. Vayetar Yitzchak l'Adonai lenochach ishto ki akara hi vayeater lo Adonai vatahar Rivka ishto vayitrotzatzu habanim bekirbah vathomer im ken lama ze anochi vatelech lidrosh et Adonai vayomer Adonai la Shnei goyim bevitnech u'shnei le'umim mime'aich yiparedu ule'om mil'om ye'ematz v'rav ya'avod tza'ir. Yitzchak pleaded with Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and Adonai responded to his plea, and his wife Rivka conceived. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "If so, why do I exist?" She went to inquire of Adonai, and Adonai answered her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.
Thank you so much. That was very beautiful. So I feel like we can start to unpack that. So we can turn the page. You can see At the top, we have a modern interpretive drawing of Yitzchak and Rivka praying. And so we're going to start with the first verse, and we're not, I'm noticing a pattern when I make source sheets. There's going to be stuff that we're going to sort of pass over. So in this first verse, I actually do want to focus on this vayetar and vayeater, these words that are used both for, in the translation that we just read, Yitzchak pleading, but there's also another translation of Yitzchak entreating, and we'll see there's other ways of understanding what that word that has the root of ayin taf resh, what that means. And then it's also how God responds to Yitzchak, as you see in the next yellow highlight, vayeater lo Adonai. Adonai responds to his plea, or Adonai was entreated of him, and then we get God's response with Rivka getting pregnant. So I want to focus on this question, and you'll see in the leading questions, what is Yitzchak doing? And I'm curious to know what you all think, but before we get there, we're going to look at a little bit of commentary, starting with, of course, our French 11th and 12th century commentator Rashi. So can someone read the Rashi in the English? Great, thank you.
So this is Genesis 25:21 you're
Yes.
referring to? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Vayetar, and Yitzchak entreated, meaning he prayed much and urgently. Vayeater lo, God was entreated of him. God let himself be urged, conciliated, and influenced by him. I say that wherever this root ayin taf resh occurs, it has a meaning of heaping up and increasing. For example, Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 11, and a thick eter cloud of incense, which means an abundance of ascending smoke. Ezekiel chapter 35, verse 13, you have multiplied, hitatartem, your words against me. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 6, the kisses of an enemy are importunate, netarot. They appear to be too many, and therefore they are burdensome. Old French encrasser to English to increase.
Thank you. That was great French pronunciation. Thank you so much. So we have Rashi adding in another possibility. So far we've had these words meaning pleading, and Yitzchak pleading, Adonai responding to his plea. We have Yitzchak entreating Adonai, and Adonai being entreated of him. And now Rashi is adding in this idea of this word having something to do with heaping up and increasing, to increase. So I want to shout out to Shayna, who recommended this drash by Rabbi Noah Kushner from the kitchen. And Rabbi Noah Kushner adds in something from her teacher. I think, yeah, let's read it. Does someone want to read this? I think it's nice, and I just want to take a quick look at what Rabbi Noah Kushner from the kitchen has to say about this word vayetar. Yes, great, thank you. Just to help us give one more idea of what could be going on with this word. Thank you.
The Hebrew word for Isaac's praying is a strange one, vayetar. Vayetar. Sure. Typically translated as he pleaded or he prayed, but that word can also mean a shovel. And my teacher, Aviva Zornberg, taught me that they say in Midrash Rabbah that the prayers of the righteous are like a shovel, because just like a shovel turns over the earth, real prayers change the acts of God. Now, I don't know. I have prayed for a lot of things, good and righteous things, and they didn't happen. But I do know that praying changed something in me, not unlike a shovel turning earth over and over. And so I was very interested to learn that when Torah says Isaac finally prays, not sure what he was doing for the first 20 years, Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, it says Isaac took Rebekah up to Mount Moriah.
Thank you. So yeah, the 20 years she's referencing, if you noticed in the beginning of the Torah reading, we heard that when Yitzchak and Rivka get married, Yitzchak is 40, and then when they have their twins, Yitzchak is 60. So, but what I want to focus on here is that this idea of praying being like a shovel. So it connects with what Rashi was saying about heaping and increasing, because you can be shoveling stuff up and there's like the piles of dirt that you're shoveling up. And so there's this like real internal prayer, internal action of what prayer is. And I also love, you can just, she references the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer Midrash that talks about that when this prayer happens, Yitzchak and Rivka go to Mount Moriah, which has all of the imagery of, the Akedah, of what happened between Yitzchak and his father Abraham. So that's just there, just to reference that. And I think we're actually going to move past, if you can keep these source sheets, and if you want to look over them more over Shabbat, it would be my pleasure. But we're going to skip over my other question about Lenochach Ishto. It just unpacks more about what's going on between them, because I want to hear from you, from our questions for reflection, which of these explanations of what Yitzchak is doing speaks to you the most? Does it make sense, you think in this moment, that he's pleading and treating? Do you like this imagery of the shoveling and increasing and the heaps of going internally and maybe going back to what happened on Mount Moriah? Do any of those speak to you? Or maybe you have another explanation of what's going on between Yitzchak and God in this verse, and I'd love to hear why. So does anyone have thoughts? Yeah.
Okay, so this is not going to answer your question that you just asked of
Fair
us,
enough.
but I will say that the shovel metaphor of turning over doesn't speak to me because I'm from Minnesota originally, and when I think shovel, I think burden and work and heavy and like not positive, but sort of negative. Like it's just interesting that particular word does not sit with me as a metaphor of like turning over and finding a new.
Thank you for that perspective, because I'm from LA, so I don't understand that idea. But that's helpful because that means maybe we need to look for a different idea of what he's doing. So if anyone has a different idea or one of these speaks to them, thank you.
I like the suggestion from Rabbi Kirshner that Isaac himself was changed by his praying, and that change might have been significant. I also feel like it's not clear that God answered and replied to Isaac. He does get Rebecca pregnant, but God speaks with Rivka.
Right, and we're going to get to that.
I think she's the only of our matriarchs to whom he speaks. I think she really is a prophetess in that sense, and it may be that, instead of always referring to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or of referring to all 7 patriarchs and matriarchs, we should occasionally be referring to Abraham, Rivka, and Yaakov.
I love that. Thank you so much. And that actually, I think, is a good, that's a good transition into what's going on with Rivka and God. So thank you for that. And I think I'll try that on sometime. I like that idea of the God of Abraham, the God of Rivka, the God of Yaakov. So let's look at what's going on with Rivka. So we have this verse, "Vayitrotzetzu habanim bekirba, vatomer im ken lama ze anochi, vatelech lidrosh et Adonai." And I do want to look at the 2 questions I have about what Rivka is doing, because they're connected. So we have the lidrosh, and we have, so what's going on with lidrosh, and vatelech, where is Rivka going? That's a question that a lot of the commentators spend time on. So we are going to start with Ramban, our Spanish 13th century commentator. And also we're going to look at the Rashi. Let's read through the Ramban, the Rashi. This time I do want to read what the Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, and the Sarna, the contemporary commentator of the 20th and early 21st century. And we can maybe have 1 or 2 people to take us through the English of those commentaries to explore what's going on with Vatelech, Lidrosh. She went, in our translation, she went to inquire, but Lidrosh can mean many other things. And Vatelech, where is she going? So does anyone want to take us through those English commentaries? Thank you.
So Ramban on Genesis 25:22, and she went lidrosh to inquire of the Eternal. Rashi comments to tell what her outcome will be. Now I have not discovered the word drisha, lidrosh, to inquire in relation to God except in the context of prayer, as in the verses, I sought, darashti, the Eternal, and he answered me. Seek ye me, dirshuni, and live. As I live, saith God the Eternal, I will not be inquired of, idaresh, by you.
Thank you. And can we get the Rashi as
Oh,
well?
sure. Batomerim Cain means, and she said, if the pain of pregnancy be so great, lama ze anochi, why is it that I longed and prayed to become pregnant? From Genesis Rabbah 63:6. Vatelech lidrosh, and she went to inquire at the school of shame, Genesis Rabbah 63:6, lidrosh et Adonai, to inquire of the Lord that God might tell her what would happen to her at the end.
Thank you. And if you want to continue, we can find someone else. Someone wants to read the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer and Sarna, also both asking the question of where did she go?
The time of her confinement came round, and her soul was nigh unto death owing to her pains. And she went to pray in the place where she and Yitzchak had gone, as is said, and she went to inquire of the Lord.
Thank you, and let's hear the Sarna too.
She went to inquire of the Lord. The idiom employed means to seek divine guidance in a moment of great perplexity and anguish. Generally, one would go to a specific sanctuary or to some charismatic personage of recognized authority. In this case, the narrative is tantalizingly short on details. According to Genesis 25:11, the couple living at Be'er Lahai Roi at this time, the place where Hagar had received the divine announcement concerning the birth and destiny of a son, as told in Genesis 16:7-14. This may have influenced Rivka to go to the same site. It is to be noted that the divine name is carefully employed in both inquiry and response, as though to dissociate her action from any pagan cultic rite.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so to recap, we have 3 explanations of maybe where Rivka went to do this lidroshing. We have Rashi, who says that she went to the school of Shem, which is a place that is talked about in Midrash. We have Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, who in the translation it seems to imply that she goes back to Mount Moriah, where Yitzchak initially had gone. In the Hebrew, I'm not so sure. The Hebrew says b'makom tahor, so it could be that she went to a pure place, but it seems like Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer and also the rabbi from the kitchen rabbi, Noah Kushner, both seem to think she's going to Mount Moriah. So Sarna says they're in Be'er Lahai Roi, so she's in the place where Hagar received the divine announcement about the birth and destiny of a son. So we have these 3 options: the school of Shem, Mount Moriah, or the place where Hagar was. So I'm curious if any of these ideas of where Rivka went to do this lidroshing make sense to you, if you have another suggestion. And then I want to talk a little bit more about what does it mean that she did this lidrosh. So any thoughts on where did Rivka go and these 3 options?
I think it makes sense that she went to Har Moriah.
Yeah.
Because not only is it a place of test for Abraham, it's also a test for Yitzchak.
Right.
Who could have fought back, could have moved to protect himself. He didn't, and that's more also a statement of his faith.
Yeah.
In Hashem, that he would not be sacrificed because we're ethical monotheists and we don't want child sacrifice anymore. And here she goes back to this place, praying, entreating, pleading, begging for children.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So that one speaks to me too. And there's a lot that Rivka can be doing, even though it wasn't her own experience in her relationship with Yitzchak. I think that's a really beautiful idea. I'll take one more thought on where Rivka might go, if anyone has one more thought.
I just want to add to what Mark just said
Yeah.
about Har Moriah, which also makes sense to me for exactly the same reasons, but lidrosh in Hebrew is also a little more demanding than is kind of reflected in these translations.
Right.
And it seems that if she's going to go be demanding that she's gonna go to Hamoria, where there was an urgent kind of demanding need for some kind of message or intervention.
Yeah.
So it was more about lidrosh.
Thank you. Yes. And speaking of lidrosh, I would love if Rabbi over here could tell us what you were saying about lidrosh and.
Oh yeah, essentially, Rivka, I believe, is the first person in the Torah to employ that word. So this is the first time we ever get the concept of drosh, and in this context, meaning prayer, it's very interesting because in text study, to drash is to come up with an explanation for something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So these two like modern ways we use the word, whether it's lidrosh to demand or lidrosh to drosh, to interpret, to explain. So I think it's so interesting the first time that it's used in this way of deep prayer. So I want to quickly look at God's response to Rivka, as you were talking about earlier. So we have in the text, on the next page, on page 6, we have Bereshit 25:23, Vayomer Adonai la. That seems to me pretty straightforward in the pshat, like you were saying, Norm, that God is speaking to Rivka. That's how I would read it in the pshat. But we have 3 more commentators. Maybe I'll just quickly read through the 3 commentators, Rashi, and then Ibn Ezra, the Spanish 12th century commentator, and Radak, the French 12th and 13th century commentator. They all have a different idea of what's going on here when God responds, Vayomer Adonai la, to Rivka. So Rashi says, Vayomer Adonai la, and the Eternal said unto her through a messenger. It was told to Shem by holy inspiration, and he told it to her. Genesis Rabbah 63:7. So we're back in this Genesis Rabbah world. Rashi's interested in this idea of she went to the school of Shem, and then Shem is acting as this messenger, this go-between between Rivka and God. And then Ibn Ezra says, and the Lord said unto her via a prophet, or through Abraham himself, for Abraham did not pass away until her sons were 15 years of age. So even though we hear of Abraham's death in last week's Parsha, Ibn Ezra, and I've seen others, and Radak will also argue, Radak says, Vayomer Adonai la means by means of the prophet who was either Shem or Abraham. So Radak is like either Rashi or Ibn Ezra, but it wasn't directly. This is what these commentators are saying. And I think it's interesting because I'm curious if 1 or 2 people want to discuss whether this verse makes sense that God is speaking to Rivka through a messenger or prophet, Shem, Abraham, maybe someone else, or what about this possibility of understanding this verse as a description of direct communication between God and Rivka?
The commentators say, and definitely a lot of others over the centuries, cannot conceive of HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking directly with a woman, regardless of how important or pious or otherwise wonderful she might be. And personally, I reject that completely. God certainly has the power to communicate directly to women just as he can directly to men, although he doesn't seem to do enough of either.
Thank you.
So I think they're just trying to come up with an excuse.
Right, thank you. That's sort of how I read it too. I'm curious, maybe we can take one more thought on this? If we, yeah?
Well, I'm just curious, like in other instances where God spoke directly to a prophet, I mean, was there any caveat that said, by the way, I'm really talking to you this time? Like, I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems as though this seems kind of selective. I mean, was there anything that would signal in other places where, okay, like, you know, yes, despite the fact that it's coincidentally a woman this time, I mean, like, is there a reason why we are to believe that this one's not like a for real direct, you know, communication with God?
Right.
Is there any, you know?
I have the same question. I think what Rashi might say, and not to speak on behalf of Rashi, but I'm trying to imagine that Rashi might say, because it says, Vatelech lidrosh, that she went somewhere. So he's going through this midrash in Genesis Rabbah, which is saying, okay, so she went to this place to do this inquiry. So she's inquiring of God, but if she goes to the school of Shem, so Shem is the person who's going to be the go-between. But I agree with this question of, for me, it seems pretty clear, at least the way I read it, I feel like God is speaking to Rivka directly. And I think because we have the history also of, we have the tradition that it could be through a messenger, through a prophet. So there's 2 reflections on the last page, page 7. Oh, yes.
Just one quick thought. I think that Norm is probably right in general that the medieval sages couldn't fathom or were not comfortable with the idea of God speaking directly to a woman. I also think that particularly Rashi, he almost always has a textual anchor for what he says, even if what he says is influenced by a philosophy. And I wonder here, and this is the smallest of things, but there's always something bothering Rashi in the verse. Normally when God speaks to a human being, the preposition is el, aleph lamed, and it's very rarely just lamed. And just lamed, la, can also be understood as about her, regarding her, with respect to her. It's not Vayomer Adonai Eleha like Vayidaber Adonai El Moshe Lemor. And so it may be that Rashi finds an opening on the fact that it's prepositional lamed, not el. And through that opening, he and others say, this reinforces our unconscious understanding that God would never speak to a woman. But it is actually indeed written differently than almost every other time that God speaks to Moshe or someone directly.
Thank you. That's great.
I had the same thought. So Baruch Shekivanti, and I also thought that I do wonder if both for Rashi and specifically for Ibn Ezra, if the thing that's bothering them is that God would have a more direct conversational relationship with Rivka than they would have with Sarah, who got a messenger to tell her family of the impending pregnancy and such. And this idea of that there would be some sort of inversion of the Yeridata Dorot with the relationship with God, that might have been like irksome in its own way. But I also had the same thought of that, it just doesn't sit well with them. In addition to the gendered relationship, I think it wouldn't have sat right with them.
Thank you so much. I think we have one more.
So I may be stretching very far here, but I kind of was just wondering, like in Genesis 25:21, we know that Yitzchak in some way communicates with God, and it says that God responds, but we don't know what that response is. So I wonder, based on what Rabbi Klickfeld was saying, if perhaps actually it's God talking now to Yitzchak and answering both of their kind of prayers to God in one breath. I don't know.
Thank you. I love that. And also because I'm looking back at that verse now, there's that mirroring of the Vaye'ater lo and then the Vayomer Adonai la. So the lo and the la are both present. That's interesting. Thank you all so much for helping us hold on to these commentaries a little bit more dearly. Thank you. So we've already done on the back, there's two reflections. We've already been doing a comparison of God's response to Rivka's prayer and God's response to Yitzchak's prayer, but I just want to sort of say that I think that's actually a beautiful direction. I was sort of thinking of, maybe understanding God's response to Yitzchak's prayer with the action of Rivka being pregnant, so that's like an active response, and then God's response to Rivka's prayer being potentially this dialogue or this like verbal or intellectual or spiritual response. So I just want to leave you with this as we go through the rest of the prayers that we have this morning and later today, if you're back for afternoon and evening prayers. So this last question at the end on the page 7, that just to take home and also something you can sit with throughout the rest of the service. When you pray, how do you pray? Is it more in line with Yitzchak's prayer or Rivka's prayer, or both, or neither? And what are your hopes in terms of a response from God? Do you hope for a response from God directly, through a messenger or prophet, through action? And I hope we find the rest of our prayers meaningful today and throughout the rest of Shabbat.